waffle. Oh, no, we still got to do this. Ah, man. You should have known that this matchup was going to be a nightmare for him because he had a headband on. Brutal spin move. Okay, nothing but analytics. The team today, Jacob's Boston Celtics. Take the floor, Jacob. What do you got?
Boston Celtics. So this is my angle on the Celtics. You're either going to shred me for this or be like, okay, I didn't see that coming. I see them as what could be the OKC Thunder in the lockout year. I think that could be the Celtics this year.
Okay.
I'm looking at youth. I'm looking at the scoring from Tatum and Brown. Actually, when you throw those teams up next to each other, which isn't fair to do, like the Celtics are a much deeper team than that Thunder team. But, of course, they don't have three. What? You think the Thunder?
Well, I would say they had James Harden coming off of the
I feel like we're misremembering that James Harden, though. I feel like that happens a lot.
Oh, no, but I think just from the standpoint of these Celtics are 29th, 30th in bench scoring this year.
Yeah. That's
like depth is like, what is depth? Like depth in terms of like rangy wings that you can play defense with. Like, yeah, they have a lot of depth there. But if you're talking about diving into the bench and getting like points in a game that you'll need like a 6th, 7th scorer, I don't think the Boston Celtics.
You have no faith in Brad Wanamaker?
No. Or is Semi Ojeleye still on the team, right?
Yeah, Simi's still there.
Right.
The strongest guy in the world.
Right.
But I think they have the best top 5 in the league. When it comes to top 5 players, once you get down there, there's not a team that has better top 5.
Including Enes Kanter in there, or who?
Smart.
Probably.
Smart's your 5th.
Huh?
Smart.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you'd throw Smart in. You'd go with like the super small ball lineup.
Yeah. Which.
Okay.
Another point. I think the whole no center thing's a little overrated.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I've come along with the whole no center thing because just the way the teams are constructed nowadays. I've just come more along with the fact that I don't like their lack of depth, or like lack of scoring depth, I should say. Like if you throw Smart, and that's why I think Smart is so important to come off the bench, because if you throw Smart off the bench and you throw him right into the starting lineup, like your best scoring option off the bench is an Enes Kanter, right? And that's just not the best option for you if you're looking for like, all right, I need somebody to come in, spell some minutes and actually get some scoring while all my guys are resting. And that's the issue I have with Boston overall.
Yeah, that's fair. I think they do a weird job at cutting up the minutes between the team. Like
right.
To your point, like I think I don't want to trash on Brad Stevens' coaching because he is a genius, but there is times it feels awkward in how they cut the guys up. Like they should do a better job at diversifying those minutes so you don't have to focus on an Enes Kanter. But I just feel like this team is underrated how much the break helped, especially Kemba Walker. Because Kemba Walker's very injury prone, and he just got like 10, 15 games saved off of his legs. Right. And I think that's really important. And same for Hayward, too. Hayward has been injury prone since that ankle, and now here's 15 games off of you. There you go. It's just, I feel like this team, I'm trying not to be a homer. I am. But I just feel like they have a good shot this year in a weird year. And I like their chances against the Sixers, even without the size.
No. They're hoping that the Sixers fall out. I think that's a terrible matchup for them. Everything else, though. So let's get to some of the offensive numbers, because what you're really going to see the strength shine through is defensively, because the defensive numbers are insane for Boston. But the offensive numbers, if you look at this overall, end up being the 5th best offensive efficiency team in the NBA, scoring 112.3 points per 100 possessions. The thing that worries you a little bit, right, their long mid-range shooting. They take a lot of long mid-range shots, but they hit them at the 10th best clip in the National Basketball Association, 41.2%. The non-corner three-point shooting is great as well. 8th best rate in that regard, 36.6%. And their half-court efficiency, which I think is partly because of coaching schemes. I think they do a really good job in the half court, despite the lack of size. 96.6 points per 100%, or per 100 possessions, if I slow down. The 11th best mark in the NBA. But the thing that also kind of sticks out there, if you look at their offensive strengths, is like, again, the efficiency's there, both overall and in the half court. But at the same time, right, like there's no massive strengths that pop out on the other parts of the floor. They're not a good team at the rim, which is usually a sign of success for a really good offensive team in the NBA. Their free throw rate's middle of the pack to the top. Remember last year, they were 27th in team free throw rate. They couldn't draw a free throw to save their lives. They're much better at this year, and I think a lot of that has to do with like a Jason Tatum getting a little bit more aggressive. His individual free throw rate should probably be a little bit better. Same with Kemba Walker, but overall, it's better than it was a year before. But you look at their strengths and you realize that like a lot of it just comes from coaching and the half court efficiency. Like they're not overall great in the fast break either. And then you look at some of their weaknesses, right? I mentioned the rim shooting. 61.7%. That's 23rd in the NBA. And again, as we've talked about multiple times, right? The correlation between your shooting at the rim and the shooting in the corners from three, they're not great at the rim. They're 23rd. They're not great from the corner threes, which is 37.5%, which is, again, another two metrics which are really key for successful offenses in the NBA. Now, these are still, again, it's a top 10 offense in the NBA if you look at their efficiency numbers. What makes them so good as well is how good they are defensively. And these numbers for them defensively are eye-popping. And I think it speaks to the depth Jacob was talking about, because they're a team full of 6'7" wings that can switch almost every single position and can play really adequate defense. Look at this from a defensive standpoint. They have the fourth best defensive rating in the NBA, right? Give up just 106.2 points per 100 possessions. Their three-point shooting, they give it to opponents 34.8%, sixth best in the NBA. Non-corner three-point shooting, 33.7%, fourth best in the NBA. They guard the mid-range well, just giving up 39% on all mid-range shots, seventh best in the NBA. Their half-court efficiency, they give up just 91.8 points per 100 possessions in half-court possessions. That is the fourth best metric in the league, and they have the best fast break defense in the NBA, 113.2 points per 100 possessions and fast break possessions. And to me, like those numbers, Jacob, like everything we just listed off, I think that speaks to the depth that you're talking about, because I would say out of all the guys they have on there, like 12 to 13 of them stand from 6'5" to 6'8". They're athletic. They can switch. They can move up and down the court, and that's their biggest strength. And defense turns into offense a lot of these times. But because of their defensive depth, I think I give them credit. Offensively is where it worries me. And in certain games, like the Rockets game right before the hiatus, in which they lost, because their offense fell off a little bit, and eventually the Rockets come back and win that game. And that's my worry with Boston, is offensively what's going to happen. And when you run into a team like Philadelphia, which is why I think that matchup is so bad, like they're great in the half court, but when every player you're playing is 6'8", 6'9", 6'10", that's where the weaknesses start to show.
My one thing on the Philadelphia matchup is Al Horford was a guy that you love to have on your team, but I'm not afraid of him on another team. That's when we look at sides with Al Horford, I'm just not concerned with him. And I think the Celtics kind of have their number too. And I like that edge on them, because I think they're a tougher team. And I think coaching is going to matter a lot in that series. And the coaching edge is huge against those two teams. So if they can find a way to just minimize Embiid, which is tough without Horford, but right. I'm not worried about Horford's size at all. I feel pretty good about them. And I like the center by committee, I think is okay this year, I'll say. Yeah. And I also hate everyone saying, well, they need to move Hayward for a center, which is the worst take in all of the basketball landscape right now.
You don't move any star for a center now in today's NBA at all, right?
And also the people downstairs, the crew downstairs, thought that I said none for defensive weaknesses, not you. They thought I put that there.
No, I put that. Like, there's literally, I should point that out. Like, just because we put none for defensive weaknesses, there are categories where they rank like 12th or, near 15th or something like that. To me, the barometer for defensive weaknesses is if you rank like 20th to 30th, right, in something. And the Celtics don't really have that. I think, it's funny, I was going to include, I'm going to pull this up now that we point this out for the folks downstairs. There was one category, it was like, it actually speaks to the lack of size. It was on defense, points they give up per putback. And essentially saying that, like, on putback attempts, right, they have trouble keeping opposing teams off the glass. And it's true, like we talked about, right? Like the lack of size that they have at times. They have a bunch of rangy wings as well. But think about it from a standpoint of like Jason Tatum. He's 6'7", but he is a spindly kind of slight 6'7". Jaylen Brown's a little bit bigger in terms of his muscle mass, but he's still not the same size as certain guys. We made the joke about Semi Ojeleye, probably the buffest wing, right, in the NBA at this point. He's got some girth, and which is why at times, you saw it more last year, but in times of the Milwaukee matchup, they would throw Semi Ojeleye on like a Giannis Antetokounmpo because he could match up with him a little bit more in terms of size and girth. And that's the issue too, is like, I wouldn't want to throw out the lack of size for Boston, but I'm also with Jacob in thinking that if your immediate analysis of Boston is they don't have any size, that's an issue. To me, it's more about the lack of scoring depth and why a guy like Marcus Smart is so important coming off the bench. It doesn't speak to how bad Marcus Smart is. It just speaks to kind of like what the Lakers did with Kyle Kuzma. Like, we don't need him in the starting lineup. We need him as part of the bench unit because we need to have, one, a ball handler, and two, just a guy who can actually score and you can rely on when you're giving rest, when you're resting guys like Tatum, like Brown, like Kemba Walker. And that has been my hang up with the Boston Celtics. And from the matchup standpoint with Philadelphia, I think that's going to be trouble. Now, I'll say this, and you saw it in regular season matchups with Houston. Like I think, like Boston and Houston are kind of really similar teams. Like they really are. They're smaller teams. They rely on wings. 3-point shooting isn't as important for Boston because I think from a scheme standpoint, they're set up much better. Obviously, they're not an isolation-heavy team like the Houston Rockets are. But they're very similar in that regard. But we have seen those types of teams give trouble to teams like the Los Angeles Clippers, like small ball lineups that can really, they can switch everything. They can move up and down the court seamlessly. They can play you out of big lineups if they want to, and they can stick with small ball lineups as well. And I think that's what's going to be interesting about Boston. And that's why I think Boston, they want to get out of that matchup with Philly. Because anybody else, if it's Miami, I think if it's Toronto, and I think if it's Indiana, Boston is really well suited to handle any one of those three matchups. It's just Philadelphia and, of course, once you get to Milwaukee, that are going to give them trouble because, one, they really don't have anybody to match up with Giannis Antetokounmpo, and two, for Philadelphia, they don't have anyone because, again, the average height, think about it, Tobias Harris, 6'9", Ben Simmons, 6'10", Josh Richardson's the smallest guy in that starting lineup at 6'7", and if you add in Shake Milton, but he's still 6'7", 6'8", and so again, there's just so much size for Philly, which is going to probably exacerbate that wound that is a little bit of a lack of size for Boston. But I do think any other matchup, they're moving on to the next round, and it's a pretty good matchup for them. And it's reflected in the price too, by the way. We talked about it a couple months ago when we thought this was going to go back to normal. It was essentially a pick price between Philly and Boston, now in a neutral. We'll see what it is. I would think maybe Boston slightly favored, but not by much. All right, that does it for The Edge here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. We are back tomorrow. We will have, I think, our long shots crew, one of them at least, to get a really good look at RBC heritage from a smarter person's perspective. English Premier League, of course, on Wednesday. Big F is going to join us tomorrow, too. We got horse racing. We're covering all the bases here on The Edge. We'll see you tomorrow.